Chapter 8, The Pod System and Sing, Sing, Sing. I had the same teacher for 4 grades in elementary school. Funny how that worked out, but it was okay for me because I really liked her. I thought she was very nice. Kindergarten was quite a tumultuous event in my young life. Leaving the kindergarten bubble for grade 1 was even scarier, but moving on from grade 1 to grade 2 really freaked me out. The 70s was one of the craziest, most interesting eras in many ways. I don't know how many school kids got to experience this, but I was one of those kids who went through the Great Pod experiment. This was an open concept, multi-classroom setup with several classrooms in one pod. No real walls to separate the classrooms, and the idea was that a kid was supposed to just be an ultimate learning sponge, sitting there in his little desk, actively learning from her own teacher, but absorbing learning from all the other classes around. Nice little pie-in-the-sky theory there. In reality, the only thing we really picked up through this was when kids in the other quadrants of the pod were in trouble and getting screamed at by their teachers. I don't recall any extra knowledge absorption. So for grade 1, I was in pod 1. I have a few fun memories from that year, like that one girl with black hair cut and a Dorothy Hamill haircut. Look it up if you want, it was pretty popular. She wore thick glasses and made paper purses whenever she got the chance. I remember her showing off yet another paper purse, and just kind of wide-eyed thinking to myself, wow, she sure makes a lot of paper purses. There was no class immediately beside ours in pod 1, so that space was used as a kind of circle time, story time section of the pod. A kid in my class barfed once during story time as the teacher was reading to us, and I got a good enough look to burn an image into my brain forever. Clearly the kid had had alphabet soup for lunch because I saw the letters and the little cubes of carrots and potatoes. Also, it was on the carpet, and that was noteworthy to me because A, it was barf, and B, it was barf on a carpet. Sure, it was a flat carpet and not plush or shag carpet, but it was still barf on a carpet. Good luck with that, Mr. Janitor, you poor soul. For grade 2, most of my friends were going to move on to their new teacher but stay in pod 1. I, however, not only had a new teacher, I was going to pod 2 in a 2-3 split class. On the first day of school after summer vacation, I had no idea where pod 2 was or how to get to it, and I wanted to just give in to panic. As the time drew nearer for the bell to ring, I made a decision. When the bell rang, I joined the line with all the other kids going to pod 1. I stood there and let the sweat roll in my hot, first day of school clothes. I was just going to tell them I did not know where the hell I was going, minus the hell part, of course. After all, this wasn't grade 1 anymore, and I was a reformed swearmouth. The line inched closer as the teacher matched each kid with her list, and then suddenly there was my teacher. She was calling me, and she seemed nice and pretty, and I felt relief that I will never forget. She actually came looking for me. I explained that I didn't know where to go, and she wasn't even mad. Turns out we had to access pod 2 by going through the doors the bigger kids went through and walk all the way down the hall, turn right, and to the end of that hall. I liked that teacher very much. Who I soon learned I was not too crazy about was Miss B, who taught a class in that pod as well, and who was our class's teacher for math. She was not nice at all. She wore blouses with ties done up in loose bows at the neck and pearl buttons on the cuffs. She blew her nose often, even as she waited for the answer to some frightening math question she put some kid on the spot for. Then she would take that tissue and stick it under the cuff of her sleeve for another time. My teacher didn't yell too often, but Miss B hollered at kids a lot. I dreaded math. We had to grab our baskets out from under our desks when it was time for math, and quickly scoot over to the class beside us and slide that plastic bin with our notebooks, etc., into the basket holder under our chairs. One time a kid whispered something to me in math class, and while I was replying, Miss B saw that I wasn't paying attention, so she asked me for the answer to her question. "Karen?" she asked, smiling, with a deceptively soothing tone. I was horrified and croaked out, "Pardon?" And she roared, "Well, you don't have to listen to me!" That, of course, stuck with me forever because I pretty much remembered any time a teacher was ever angry at me. And then there was the sheer volume and the crisp accent, which seemed to make it even more severe. But the phrasing was just kind of perplexing. At any rate, mortifying. I probably spent the rest of the class desperately trying not to cry. Seriously, I spent a lot of my childhood trying not to cry, it seems. Like, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. But if a teacher or adult was the least bit annoyed with me, forget it. There'd always be that kid sitting beside just staring too, to see if you would cry. Kind of like a mini psychologist in the making, all fascinatedly scanning your emotions. Are you crying? I'm not crying. How come it looks like you're crying? I'm not crying. There's something in my eye. Yeah, you're crying. The pod classes would all amalgamate for art day. Maybe teachers figured if they were trying to teach something totally boring, but another class was having a hoop-de-doo art hell of a good time, it would be harder to keep their own students attentive. I almost always loved art class. Totally the best day of the week. Art day was such a lively day, the whole pod filled with noisy, busy joy and happy creation. There was a hard, fast rule in art class, though. If it was a cut-and-paste art project, you had to look through the scrap box first to find the piece of construction paper you needed, and you only got a fresh, big, beautiful, untouched piece of colored construction paper if you couldn't find something you needed in the scrap box. This was made very clear. The scrap box was set in the middle of the pod, and that is where you had to look first. It couldn't be stressed enough how damn important it was to check the scrap box first. But oblivious young Karen, delighted and filled with ideas for Valentine-themed art, grabbed a great big new sheet of red construction paper, folded it in half, and cut 3 small hearts right out of the very center. And then, oblivious Karen came out of her art trance and immediately realized what the fuck she had just done. With horror, I took that sheet of paper back and tried to bury it deep in the scrap box. It didn't work. Not long after, one of the teachers was suddenly holding that piece of paper, shame, up for all to see, and shouting, "Who did this?" Silence across the pod. Scissors held in mid-cut. All eyes wide. "Who did this?" Kids looking around at other kids to see who did it. Karen, sweating bullets, looking around too, in the most important performance of her life, as though her face said, "Yeah, who did do that?" I mean, I was a very honest kid, but that teacher was pissed, and there was no way I was turning myself in. Not that day. After a moment of pin-drop silence, that teacher was even angrier, and everybody got a lecture because I was too cowardly to take the fall. "I told you people not to take a new piece of paper!" Lesson learned. Yes, love art class, but never lose yourself to the art like that again. What I loved as much as art was singing. I was good at it too, which is a nice contrast to how much I sucked at gym class. I loved singing. I loved singing in music class and singing with my classmates for various school plays, and I really looked forward to Christmas carols in the gym. They'd have the big white screen rolled down and the overhead set up to project song lyrics onto the screen. One of the teachers would be in charge of the overhead, or maybe a bold kid who actually wanted to flip song lyrics on there. That was not me. I did not feel confident with the overhead machine or anything like that. Holy shit, how many people nowadays even know what an overhead projector is? Well, there's your research assignment. There were probably plenty of kids who did not enjoy singing Christmas songs, but I freaking loved it. A few hundred of us all crammed together on the hard gym floor, sitting cross-legged, singing all the festive classics. What's not to like? Granted, sitting cross-legged like that until one or both of your feet falls asleep was a bit of a drawback, and if the gym assembly or event was long enough, that foot could be pins and needles all the way up one half of your crotch. But singing Christmas carols was still awesome. I was in grade 6 when our teachers were scouting for new recruits for our various school choirs. I remember standing in a line with our class, and we were all singing "O Canada." As we sang, a few teachers, including my teacher, the nice one, who I had as my homeroom teacher a zillion times, were walking up and down among the kids, leaning in and listening to each of us as we sang and selecting kids who they thought had a good singing voice. So I got chosen to be in the large choir, the girls' choir, and the ensemble. Every spring there was a school music festival, and many of the elementary schools in town took part in that competition, so it was time to start getting ready for that. The choirs also performed at our school Christmas concerts for parents and families. I was just daydreaming about school singing the other day as I folded laundry. At our Christmas concert, 3 of the grade 8 girls did a moving a cappella rendition of the Coventry Carol in 3-part harmony. I was quite jealous. It was the showstopper song of the evening. I wished I could have been one of them up there. For years I thought of those girls and a few others in grade 8 as just not nice. Very condescending to us, the younger members of the choir. But then it dawned on me that by the time you're in grade 8, you are usually almost completely sick of your elementary school, totally sick of being in a school filled with immature little kids, and nearly all kids in younger grades are annoying. It's a grade 8 thing. You feel like you're hot shit, the coolest, far too cool to be at a school filled with babies any longer. I know I did when I was in grade 8. I know that my kids both found all younger kids insufferable when they were in grade 8. Funny thing to get perspective on a million years later. Anyway, eventually I was in the choir, the girls' choir, the ensemble, the triple trio, and the rather illustrious triple duet. There were 9 people in the triple trio. 3 sang soprano, 3 sang mezzo-soprano, and 3 sang alto. I was always a soprano back then. Triple duet was the most stressful of all, because not only was it only comprised of 6 singers, it was just me and one of my friends hitting those super high notes together, and if I sucked at it, there were not enough voices to hide behind. We practiced and practiced, and as the spring music festival drew closer, we even had to fit in some practice time on lunch breaks. My friend lived super close to the school, so I would eat lunch at her house on those days, instead of that 15-minute trek home and 15-minute back when I went home for lunch. On competition day, we had to go to a high school in town that had a large, proper stage and auditorium. It was nerve-wracking, and of course we had to dress nicely. Our large girls' choir wasn't great, and never won. Our large co-ed choir was meh. Our ensemble and smaller singing groups, however, kicked ass, and we took first place every year in all of those. I was in the triple duet in grade 8, and being on stage for that was extremely tense. We had to wait backstage as the other girls sang, and feel weird about their slightly different takes on the same song. When it was time for us to go on, it was dead quiet in the auditorium. Just the judges, my teacher, one of our 2 familiar and very nice piano accompanists, and us extremely nervous girls. In practices, I could sing that song and hit those high notes no problem. At the competition, I felt like I'd lost half my air and at least that amount of my singing power. It felt like I could barely force out enough volume to just get those notes out. I believe the judges saw that we were very nervous but talented and made us sing it again. We won first prize. Dad came for some of those competitions. He would manage to find a little time during his workday, and it was so exciting whenever Dad was there cheering me on for everything in his fireman's uniform. Hubs continued. By August of 2019, Hubs was nearly unrecognizable to his former self. For as long as I had known him, he'd been a tall, brawny guy. Like me, his weight had been on a steady incline over the years we'd been together, but he carried it so well. You'd never know that he was carrying a pretty heavy weight before he got sick. After 5 months, however, he was like a walking skeleton. He'd lost nearly 80 pounds from not being able to eat any meals larger than a toddler's portion. He'd shaved off his beard during the summer because he was tired of barfing through it. His hair seemed thin and fine and without any luster. His complexion fluctuated between a grayish putty to pale to a concerning ruddiness. He was desperate to just be able to eat, and he hounded us continuously to try new and exciting junk food meals, just so he could live vicariously through us eating. He watched videos endlessly of people cooking decadent favorites like ribs slathered in sauce, huge pizzas covered in cheese, anything deep fried. He was skinny enough that I could see every bone in his back, but he had a distended, bumped-out stomach in the front like a pregnant lady. He was cold all the time and had to wear jogging pants and a hoodie inside while the air conditioning was on, even though the rest of us were comfortable. Our annual beach trip had arrived, and for the first time ever, I had to load our things into the van. This was because, to add insult to injury, during one of Hubs's last stays in the hospital, he found out he had a hernia. So not only was the poor guy a wreck, he also couldn't lift anything remotely heavy at this point, and was now looking at hernia surgery in the future, after that much-needed surgery to get rid of that damn pancreatic cyst and gallbladder. So I had to, with help from the kids, be the one to load up the van for our vacation. Every other year, I was the one who packed and organized all of our stuff, which is a lot, and then, when I was completely burnt out and we were all ready to hit the road, Hubs would load it all into the van. Funny little story this makes me think of, even though I digress, but worth telling just the same. Let's call it the drunk guy in our yard that year we were heading off for vacay. So it was late summer, several years before, and the day had finally arrived to leave for our highly anticipated and much-loved family vacation by the beach. It was a very hot summer's day and sunny. By this point in summer, most people's lawns start to turn yellow and kind of crispy from intense, prolonged heat. Hubs was outside, finishing up last details like watering the plants before we left and starting to load up the van, etc., etc. Our daughter was out there with him, and she was still young enough for me to be even more protective of her than I am now, which is pretty protective. Classic nervous helicopter mom. I was inside, closing blinds, closing windows, when I looked out the front window and happened to see some questionable guy milling around on our front lawn, kind of dancing around. "What the fuck is this guy doing?" I said with protective annoyance, and then I stormed over to the side door and yelled out, "Where's Girlie?" "She's right here." "Why?" "Tell her to come in the house. Some guy is on our front lawn." Well, Hubs is very territorial, so he went and checked it out right away and calmly asked the guy, "Can I help you?" The guy grinned sheepishly and quickly stumbled off. I'm usually pretty keyed up by the time we're ready to leave, so I was not impressed. While we were on the road, I called my sister, who wouldn't be checking into her trailer until the next day, to tell her that some guy had been on our lawn and to keep an eye out to make sure no more weirdos come back to make little piles of dead grass. That's what it looked like he was doing, piling grass, then dancing around a bit. Sister thought it was rather hilarious and insane, which it was, and said she'd keep an eye out. I hung up the phone and Hubs added casually, "Piling grass and trying to light it on fire," he said cheerfully. "What?" "Yeah, Buddy made a little pile of dead lawn clippings and was trying to set it ablaze with his lighter. What the fuck?" Luckily, he never returned. Okay, so that was in happier times. There was no drunken dirtbag on our front lawn in 2019, but there was a very miserable, burnt-out woman packing up the van in a storm cloud of a mood and shamefully annoyed with the poor man for not being able to be anything but sick. Terrible the things you can feel inside sometimes, even when you know they're completely wrong. I drove us there as well. The first thing Hub spotted after we made it through the front gate and finished checking in was the new weekend attraction to the park set up near the Welcome Center, food trucks. He started hounding us almost immediately. Would Girlie and I like to try an empanada from the food truck? I don't know, maybe later. Not at this moment anyway. You should go back after we check in and go check out the food trucks. He'd buy us empanadas if we wanted. He literally almost drove us crazy wanting to get us empanadas that week. Empanada this, empanada that. Didn't we just want to try it? When was someone going to try an empanada? It was annoying as hell. We probably even had to get all testy at one point. "We don't want an empanada." Geez, we probably didn't want one simply because he wasn't able to shut up about it. I mean, it's nothing against empanadas at all. Hubs drove us mildly crazy, constantly suggesting, pushing junk food on us just so he could watch us eat it. After all, what had I packed for his vacation meals? Some weird soups I'd made and frozen for him, those awful meal replacement shakes, and suddenly he was acutely aware that vacation fun mostly meant fun foods that he could not eat. I bought some vegan wieners for him that year because the fat content was ridiculously low. Now, I love vegan and vegetarian meals, but those vegan hot dogs were gross. Gross. Ugh. Weird texture, glaringly lacking in that unmistakable hot dog flavor. Poor Hubs, however, was thrilled to even have anything that remotely resembled a sausage. That whole summer, I feel like it was a battle to keep him from overeating and pushing his luck with food at any given point. I can't blame him because he was starving, but I was in a constant state of fear that the next meal could send him back to the hospital again. God, I was determined to keep him out of the damn hospital until he was able to get surgery on that monster cyst. Absolutely determined. It wasn't the best vacation. Hubs felt rotten most of the time, and cold. The water at the lake was intolerably freezing to him, and he just couldn't bear it. Often we had to go off to the beach for the afternoon without him. Once again, I was annoyed and pissed off. What the fuck was the matter with me? I knew it was a terrible way to feel. After all those months, I had to keep going, but on the inside I was dying and couldn't take that constant stress anymore. Every night would start the monstrous burping and hiccuping again. He could only kind of sleep sitting up in a chair. One night he was having an awful dream that he was going to be sick, and suddenly he woke up making alarming, retching, pre-vomit sounds. I leapt up from the pull-out couch where I was sleeping nearby, grabbed a plastic bag and flew to his side. He was nearly in a panic, probably from the awful dream, probably from having been so stoic for so long, probably from an unacknowledged terror that had naturally formed about vomiting. I wrapped my arms around him and squeezed him tight, one arm clamped around his bony shoulders, one hand on the side of his head. "You're all right. You're all right," I said, trying to sound strong and desperately trying to keep calm and keep him from vomiting. I was shaking and my mind was screaming, "Please, God, no!" And I kept repeating, "You're all right." And somehow he managed to breathe through it and not be sick. I think it might have been then that I discovered those juice boxes. I don't know. I seemed to have this intuitive thought that his freaked-out digestive system needed something to digest at all times, otherwise it went haywire. It was a blessing. It stopped the hiccups and burping. Before that awful, almost vomit night, Hubs had been having terrible nights with very little sleep thanks to near-constant giant nighttime burps. I was beside myself. We hadn't received a firm appointment date with the specialist yet. While on vacation, I was on the phone with everyone. The surgeon's office, my doctor, the specialist. Can you believe they were all on vacation that week, or about to be on vacation that week? I pleaded with receptionists about the constant burping and gas. He couldn't live like this. But there was nothing to do but wait until the doctors were back from vacation. I cried. So yeah, that stupid juice was a blessing. Somehow we made it through that week. It wasn't sunshiny and carefree. It wasn't free of worries. It wasn't filled with light-hearted good times. I felt like I was going through the motions of fun that week, and it felt like we were the only ones who had something terrible to deal with. I'm sure that's not true, but that's how it felt, and good Lord, it felt lonely. I remember looking at all the people who I passed by at various points and feeling envious of their happy vacations. We arrived back home at the end of that week, and I felt weary and defeated. But things were going to finally change, and one day, not long thereafter, that miraculous phone call came with our appointment with the specialist. It was scheduled for the Monday on the last week of summer vacation.